Give me 3 minutes. The crowd laughed. 23 of the best mechanics in America had already walked away from that machine in defeat. Factory engineers, Harley specialists, builders whose names appeared in magazines. And now an 18-year-old kid in a gas station shirt, hands black with grease, was asking for 3 minutes. Logan Steele looked at him for a long moment, not laughing, not smiling, just looking. 3 minutes, Logan said. Start when you touch it. If you've ever watched someone walk into a room and instantly change everything in it, drop a comment below with the city you were watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button and stay with me until the very end. Because what happened next didn't just fix a motorcycle, it changed what a lot of people thought they knew about talent pride and what it means to earn something. The Iron Beast wasn't just a motorcycle. That's the first thing you need to understand before any of this makes sense. Because if you walk into this story thinking it's about a broken engine and a kid who got lucky, you'll miss everything that actually mattered. The Iron Beast was Logan Steele's declaration to the world. 10 years of obsession poured into titanium and chrome, a custom build so sophisticated that the engineers who designed parts of it had never seen them assembled together in quite that way. It had been commissioned piece by piece, built in 3 different states, blessed by mechanics who had spent decades working on machines that most people would never be allowed to touch. It weighed 640 pounds fully loaded. It produced power numbers that made professional racers go quiet when they heard them. And it had never in 4 years of riding given Logan Steele a single problem. Until the morning of the Riverside charity ride, Logan had pulled out of the staging area the same way he always did, slow, deliberate, letting the crowd feel the machine before it moved. 2,000 people had gathered along the road. There were news cameras. There were children on their parents' shoulders. There were veterans who had driven 3 hours to be there, standing along the barricades in their cuts and their colors, because this ride wasn't just for show. It was raising money for families who had lost someone. It was the kind of thing Logan had been doing quietly for 15 years long before anyone cared to write about it. He had made it exactly 47 yards from the staging area when the Iron Beast died. Not a sputter, not a rough idle, not the kind of cough an engine makes when it's cold or unhappy. The machine simply stopped as if someone had reached inside it and pulled out its heart. One moment, the exhaust note was filling the street with that deep rolling thunder that people felt in their chests. The next moment, there was nothing. Silence. Logan squeezed the throttle. Nothing. He tried the ignition. The dash lit up, ran through its cycle, showed every reading in the normal range. He tried to start it again. The starter engaged. The engine turned over and then stopped. Perfectly, completely stopped, as if it had made a decision. Logan sat there for 3 seconds without moving. The crowd closest to him had gone quiet. In the back, people were still cheering, still waiting, not yet understanding that something had gone wrong. A man near the barricade called out, "You good, Logan?" And Logan looked up at him and said nothing, because Logan Steele had not built a reputation on pretending things were fine when they weren't. He swung off the bike. He stood beside it with his hands on his hips and looked at it the way you look at something you love that has just done something you cannot explain. "Get me Danny," he said. Danny Reeves was his personal mechanic, a man who had been working on custom bikes for 30 years and who had forgotten more about engines than most certified technicians would ever learn. Danny was beside the bike inside of 90 seconds, already crouching, already running his hands along the frame, pressing his ear close to the engine casing the way a doctor presses a stethoscope to a chest. He tried starting it twice himself, got the same result. He pulled out his diagnostic scanner and plugged into the bike's OBD port. The scanner talked to the bike's ECU for 40 seconds. It returned no error codes, no fault readings, no warnings of any kind. Every system, according to the data, was functioning perfectly, except the engine would not run. Danny stood up slowly. He looked at Logan. Something passed between them. Not words, just the understanding that this was not going to be a quick fix. That whatever was wrong with this machine, it was not something that declared itself honestly. "I need time," Danny said. "How much time?" "I don't know yet." Logan nodded once. He turned to his road captain and said, "Tell the organizers we're pushing the start. Don't tell them why." He pulled out his phone and made 2 calls before he even walked back to the staging area. By noon, 3 additional mechanics had looked at the Iron Beast. By 3 in the afternoon, the charity ride had been officially postponed. By evening, the news that Logan Steele's personal motorcycle had broken down the Iron Beast, The machine that had become something of a legend in enthusiast circles had already started moving through social media in the way that stories about powerful people always do, quietly at first and then all at once. Logan sat in the back of the event tent that night and let people talk. He didn't interrupt. He didn't correct the speculation. He just listened while three of the most experienced custom bike engineers he knew went through every possibility they could think of and came up empty each time. The fuel system was intact. The electrical connections were clean. The mechanical components showed no signs of failure. The engine itself, when examined in pieces, was in near-perfect condition. "It's like it just decided to quit," one of the engineers said, and then immediately looked embarrassed for saying something that sounded so unscientific. Logan didn't laugh at him. He thought about it for a long moment and then said, "What don't we understand about it?" "Nobody had a good answer," he said. "Find out." Sharing. The second day brought specialists. Logan had made it known through the channels that mattered in that world that the Iron Beast had a problem nobody could diagnose, and that he was willing to pay serious money for a solution. By 8 in the morning, a factory-trained engineer from the manufacturer of the bike's custom ECU had flown in from Ohio. He spent 4 hours with the machine. He ran every diagnostic protocol he knew. He called 2 colleagues on the phone and walked through the problem with them step by step. At the end of 4 hours, he told Logan with visible discomfort that he could not find the source of the failure. Logan thanked him, paid him for his time, and called the next name on his list. By the end of the second day, 7 mechanics had examined the Iron Beast. Not one of them had been able to identify the problem. The machine continued to behave the same way each time: diagnostics, normal components, intact engine, refusing to run. It was, technically speaking, a perfectly healthy machine that simply would not function. The story was growing now. Someone had filmed Logan's original breakdown from the crowd, and the footage was making its way around the internet with the kind of speed that only happens when a story has the right ingredients: a famous name, an expensive machine, and an unsolvable mystery. The comments were running in 2 directions. Some people were sympathetic. Others were enjoying the spectacle of something powerful being brought low by something it couldn't control. That was human nature, and Logan understood it without resenting it. What he didn't understand yet was how much bigger it was about to get. On the morning of the third day, he made the announcement. He did it in the parking lot of the venue, standing beside the Iron Beast, with no prepared speech and no media handler telling him what to say. He had called the press himself. Local news, some national outlets that had already been sniffing around the story, a handful of the most prominent motorcycle media channels in the country. They gathered around him in a loose half circle, and Logan looked at them for a moment before he spoke, and when he spoke, his voice was completely level. 23 days, he said. 23 days of this charity ride has been delayed because of this machine. And in that time, we've had some of the best mechanical minds in this country look at it and come away with nothing. He paused. He let that sit. So I'm going to do something I've never done before. I'm going to open this up. Whoever can diagnose and fix the Iron Beast completely correctly, with the engine running the way it was built to run, gets a reward of $5.4 million. There was a beat of silence so complete that you could hear traffic from the highway 3 blocks away. Then the questions started, and Logan answered exactly 3 of them before he walked back inside, because he had said what he needed to say, and there was nothing left to add. By that afternoon, the number $5.4 million was in every headline that touched the story. By evening, it had been picked up by international outlets. The Iron Beast, a motorcycle, had become the most talked about broken machine on Earth, and the people started coming. They came from everywhere. They came with tools and credentials and reputations and confidence. They came because $5.4 million is a number that changes the gravity of a room, that makes people willing to try things they might otherwise consider beneath them or beyond them. A man who had built championship-winning drag bikes drove up from Texas in a trailer. A woman who held 3 patents in motorcycle fuel system design flew in from Germany. A retired Harley-Davidson development engineer who had worked on the touring line for decades showed up in a rental car with a briefcase full of specialized equipment. Logan let them all in. He stood back and watched and said very little, because he had already learned in the first 2 days that talking didn't help. He observed each mechanic's approach, the way they moved around the bike, what they checked first, what they trusted, and what they questioned. He was not a formally trained engineer. He had learned mechanics the way a lot of people from his generation learned it, through necessity and repetition, and the particular kind of attention you develop when you can't afford to pay someone else to fix your problems. But he understood enough to watch someone work and get a sense of whether they were thinking or performing. Most of them were performing. Not because they were dishonest, they believed in themselves. They had good reasons to believe in themselves. But there was a quality to their work that Logan kept noticing, a tendency to move straight to the most complex possibilities, to treat the problem as something grand and obscure, something worthy of their expertise. They weren't looking for a problem. They were looking for the right kind of problem. The factory-certified Harley specialist spent 6 hours on the fuel injection system. He disassembled components that had never needed to be touched. He found nothing wrong and left without speaking to anyone. The woman with the fuel system patents ran a spectral analysis on the fuel itself, looking for contamination. The fuel was clean. She ran it twice. She adjusted her hypothesis and moved to the injector, timing spent 3 hours there, and eventually told Logan quietly that she was out of ideas she was comfortable sharing. The retired development engineer was the most thorough of any of them. He worked slowly and systematically and never seemed frustrated. He was there for 2 days. On the second day, he asked Logan if he could see the original build documentation for the bike's electrical system, and Logan had someone pull it up on a laptop. The engineer studied it for an hour and said, "There may be a software interaction here that nobody anticipated." But when pressed for specifics, he admitted that diagnosing it would require equipment he didn't have access to, and that even with the right equipment, he wasn't sure he could reproduce the conditions under which the failure occurred. 14 mechanics, 16, 19, 20. Each failure became part of the story. The live stream that a motorcycle media channel had set up in the parking lot was drawing hundreds of thousands of viewers at peak times. The comment sections were brutal in the way that anonymous crowds always are when they sense blood. People speculated that the bike was unfixable, that Logan was being played by whoever had built it, that the whole thing was staged, that nobody offers $5.4 million for a motorcycle repair without some angle being worked. Logan didn't address any of it. He let the noise happen around him and kept his focus on the problem. But by the 22nd failed attempt, even the people closest to him were starting to feel the weight of it. His road captain, a quiet, steady man named Marcus, who had ridden beside Logan for 11 years, pulled him aside on the 4th evening and said, "Logan, you might need to consider the possibility that this one doesn't get fixed. At least not by anyone who's come through here." Logan looked at him for a moment. "You think I should quit?" "I think there's no shame in accepting that some problems don't have available solutions." "That's a different thing than quitting," Logan said. "But no, I don't think that's right." He looked back toward the parking lot where the Iron Beast sat under a canopy attended by 2 men who were on their 23rd attempt. "I've been watching how everyone works, and they're all doing the same thing in different ways. They're looking for one failure, one thing that went wrong. But I don't think it's one thing." Marcus looked at him. "What do you think it is?" "I think it's 4 things," Logan said. "And I think they're only visible when you look at them together, which means we need someone who can see the whole picture, not just the part they're trained to see." Marcus thought about that. Then he said, "Where do you find someone like that?" And Logan said, honestly, "I don't know, but I think they find you." He showed up on the morning of the 4th day. No truck, no trailer full of specialized equipment, no assistant carrying cases of tools. He came on a city bus, walked the last 6 blocks from the stop, and arrived at the venue wearing a gray gas station uniform shirt with the name of a place in Montana stitched above the pocket. He was 18 years old, which you could see clearly and immediately, not because he looked young in a soft way, but because there was a particular quality of stillness about him that very young people sometimes have before the world teaches them to perform more. His hands were the hands of someone who worked with them constantly, knuckles nicked and healed over grease that had settled into the lines of his palms in a way that soap would take days to fully clear. He spoke to the woman managing the sign-in area for potential mechanics. She looked at him the way you look at someone who has come to the wrong place, not unkindly, but with a certainty that a mistake has been made. "This is for the Iron Beast repair," she said, as if clarifying might resolve the confusion. "I know," he said. "We've had some of the best mechanics in the country here this week." "I know that too," he said. "I've been reading about it." She studied him for a moment. Something in his face, not confidence, exactly, but the absence of anxiety, gave her pause. She made a call. She passed the phone to him. He spoke to someone briefly and then handed the phone back and waited. When Logan came out to look at him, neither of them spoke for a moment. Logan looked at the uniform, at the hands, at the face that gave nothing away. "You're a mechanic?" Logan asked. "I work at a gas station. I fix what comes through." "That's not what I asked." The boy looked at him steadily. "I've been working on engines since I was 9. My father had a garage. He got sick and couldn't run it anymore, so I started doing his work. I don't have certifications. I don't have a shop. But I know what's wrong with your bike." That last sentence landed differently than the others. Not louder, not more emphatic, just declarative, the way you state something that you simply know. Logan was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he said, 22 mechanics couldn't figure it out. 23, the boy said. I was watching the last one through the fence this morning. He was looking in the same place as everyone else. And where should he have been looking? I'll show you. Give me 3 minutes. Somewhere behind Logan, someone laughed. It was the kind of laugh that happens automatically, the body's response to something that seems obviously absurd. And Logan turned slowly toward the sound and the laugh stopped. He turned back to the boy. He studied him for another long moment, the stillness, the hands, the absolute absence of need for anyone in that crowd to believe him. What's your name? Logan asked. Ethan, the boy said. Ethan Cole. Logan nodded once. 3 minutes, he said. Start when you touch it. Ethan Cole walked toward the Iron Beast the way someone walks toward a thing they already understand, not slow, not fast, just purposeful, with the kind of economy of movement that comes from years of working in tight spaces where every gesture has to mean something. The crowd parted just enough to let him through, mostly because people were curious in the way they get curious about something they were also prepared to laugh at. A few phones came up. The live stream camera swung in his direction. Someone in the back called out, "Who's the kid?" And someone else replied, "Nobody." And that answer seemed to satisfy the crowd completely. Logan stood 6 feet back and said nothing. Ethan reached the bike. He didn't circle it the way the other mechanics had, doing that slow, deliberate walk around that communicates expertise to an audience. He stopped at the right side, crouched down to eye level with the engine casing, and just looked. Not touching yet, just looking. His eyes moved in a pattern that wasn't random. You could tell if you watched closely that he was tracing something specific, following a line of thought that had a beginning and a direction. Marcus leaned close to Logan and said quietly, "He's not even touching it yet." "I know," Logan said. "The clock's running." "I know that too." 40 seconds passed. The crowd began to stir. Someone said, "Is he going to actually do something?" Someone else said, "He's thinking genius." And those two people looked at each other with the specific hostility of strangers who disagree in public. Then Ethan moved. He pressed 2 fingers against the frame rail just ahead of the battery box, held them there for 3 seconds, released. He moved to the ECU housing and did something that nobody in the crowd could quite see. His hand was partially blocked by the frame, and then he stood up and walked around to the left side of the bike. He pressed his palm flat against the fuel tank near the seam, held it there, released. He crouched again and looked at the underside of the fuel housing with his head tilted at an angle not touching, just looking at something that apparently required that particular angle to see clearly. 1 minute and 12 seconds had elapsed. Danny Reeves, who had positioned himself near the front of the crowd, crossed his arms and watched with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral and not quite succeeding. He had been the first mechanic to fail, and he had spent 4 days since then watching other people fail in different ways. And he had arrived at a settled certainty that whatever was wrong with the Iron Beast was wrong in a way that required equipment and data that no individual working by hand could identify in any reasonable time frame. He was watching this teenager and feeling 2 things simultaneously: the professional irritation of someone who suspects they're watching a performance and something quieter underneath it that he didn't want to name yet. Ethan straightened up. He looked at Logan. "Your grounding cable on the secondary circuit has an intermittent break," he said. "It's not a clean break, it's a microfracture that opens under thermal expansion. So it tests fine cold and fails when the engine comes to operating temperature. That's why your diagnostics show nothing. The fault isn't present when the bike is sitting still." Silence. Logan looked at him. "What else?" Ethan tilted his head slightly, the way a person does when they're confirming they heard a question correctly. He hadn't expected that. He'd expected argument or dismissal, or at least surprise. The fact that Logan had said, "What else?" as if he already understood there was more changed something in Ethan's posture almost imperceptibly. "Sensor timing drift," Ethan said. Your crank position sensor and your throttle position sensor are both reading correctly individually, but they're operating with a tolerance gap that's just wide enough to cause a conflict under load. Neither one is broken. Together, they're creating a condition the ECU doesn't know how to handle. And the ECU itself, software conflict. The firmware version on your ECU has a known interaction issue with the custom fuel mapping that was loaded into it. Whoever built this bike loaded a fuel map that was written for a different firmware version. Under normal conditions, it runs fine. Under specific load and temperature conditions, the ECU gets conflicting instructions and shuts down the fuel system as a safety response. He paused. It thinks it's protecting the engine. Logan had not moved. He had not changed expression. His arms were at his sides, and he was looking at Ethan with the full weight of his attention, which was a thing that people who had been around Logan Steele for years described as almost physical, like being looked at by someone who had decided that whatever you were saying was the only thing happening in the world right now. You said 4 failures, Logan said. That's 3. Ethan crouched back down and pointed, not touching, just pointing at a specific section of the fuel housing near the bottom. There's a micro fracture in the fuel housing at the lower seam. It's not leaking yet, but under pressure, it's flexing just enough to cause a momentary drop in fuel pressure that compounds the ECU issue. They're working together. None of them alone would stop this engine. Together, they create a cascading failure that looks like nothing because you're searching for one broken thing and there are 4 broken things hiding behind each other. 1 minute and 58 seconds. The crowd was not laughing anymore. That had stopped somewhere around the 1-minute mark, quietly without anyone acknowledging it. The people who had been holding their phones up to mock were still holding their phones up, but the energy had changed. They were recording now because they didn't want to miss what was happening, not because they expected it to be funny. Danny Reeves had uncrossed his arms. A woman 2 rows back, she had driven up from Sacramento and had been working on motorcycles since 1987, had put her hand over her mouth. Marcus was looking at Logan. Logan was not looking at Marcus. "Can you fix it?" Logan asked. "I already know how," Ethan said, "but I need a few specific things." He listed them, not hesitating, not searching for the right words, just listing them the way you recite a phone number you've dialed enough times to have memorized. A specific gauge wire for the grounding circuit repair. A laptop with the correct firmware version and the ability to access the ECU's base settings. A fuel pressure gauge. And someone who could get him the original fuel map file that had been loaded into the ECU before the custom mapping was installed. Logan looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at the logistics of what had just been requested and said, "Laptop's in the trailer. Wire I have. Fuel pressure gauge, Danny has one. The original map file." He paused. He took out his phone. "I'll call the builder." "Make the call," Logan said. 2 minutes and 21 seconds. Shaggy. What happened in the next 3 minutes was the kind of controlled chaos that happens when a situation shifts faster than the people around it can adjust. Marcus was on the phone. Someone was running to the trailer for the laptop. Danny Reeves had walked straight to his truck without being asked and was already coming back with the pressure gauge because Danny was a professional, and professionals do not let pride get in the way of a problem being solved even when the solution is coming from a direction that embarrasses them. But the clock had run past 3 minutes and someone in the crowd noticed. "Time's up," a man called out. His voice had that particular quality of someone who has been waiting for an excuse to say something. He said, 3 minutes. It's been 4. Logan turned toward the voice with a slowness that suggested he had all the time in the world and was choosing to use it in this direction. He looked at the man. The man was maybe 50, broad across the shoulders, wearing a jacket with a shop logo on it. He had the look of someone who'd worked with machines his whole life and had built an identity around knowing things. "His 3 minutes were for the diagnosis," Logan said. "He gave me the diagnosis." He held the man's gaze for 1 additional second, not threatening, not aggressive, simply communicating that the conversation was complete. And then he turned back to Ethan. The man in the shop jacket said nothing else. Ethan was crouched beside the bike again, looking at the grounding circuit with the kind of focus that blocks out everything peripheral sound crowd pressure, the specific awareness that several hundred people were watching him, and that the live stream currently had 400,000 concurrent viewers who were watching a teenager in a gas station shirt either validate everything he just claimed or publicly destroy his credibility in front of a camera that would save it forever. None of that was on Ethan's face. What was on his face was the problem. Danny arrived with his pressure gauge and crouched beside him without a word. The two of them were close together over the engine now, and Danny said quietly, "Where exactly?" And Ethan showed him, and Danny pressed the gauge fitting into place and read the result and straightened up and looked at Logan and said in a voice that was making a serious effort to stay steady, "He's right about the fuel pressure. It's dropping, not much, but it's dropping." The woman 2 rows back said, "Oh my God, my God," in a tone that was completely involuntary. Someone closer to the front turned and repeated it to the person behind them. "He's right about the fuel pressure." And it moved through the crowd in that specific way that information moves when it's confirming something people were starting to believe but didn't want to say out loud. The live stream chat was exploding, not the scattered comments of a bored audience, but the rapid-fire response of a crowd that had just watched something they didn't expect. Marcus appeared at Logan's shoulder. "Builder's calling back in 2 minutes. He's checking his files for the original map." "Tell him to check faster," Logan said. Ethan stood up. He looked at Logan with that same level gaze, no triumph in it, no performance, just information being communicated between two people who were both focused on the same problem. "While we wait on the file," Ethan said, "I can address the grounding issue and start on the sensor calibration. The fuel housing fracture, I can seal it with what you have on hand. It won't be a permanent fix. Long-term, you want to replace the housing, but it'll hold for the ride." "Do it," Logan said. And that was the moment that Danny Reeves later said he would think about for a long time, not the diagnosis, not the fuel pressure reading, not any of the technical details that had already upended 4 days of expert failure. He said what stayed with him was the way Logan said those 2 words, "Do it." Because Logan Steele was not a man who handed trust out casually. He had not given any of the previous 22 mechanics that kind of unqualified permission. He had watched them, observed them, allowed them to work within limits. But there was something in the way he said "do it" to this 18-year-old, something that sounded less like permission and more like recognition. Ethan went to work. He worked with the wire first, stripping the end, running the repair with a precision that made Danny wince slightly because it was better than clean. It was exactly right, the kind of connection that doesn't just fix the problem, but fixes it so it can't come back the same way. He worked without talking, without narrating what he was doing, without glancing up to check whether the crowd was watching. His hands knew the task, and they did it, and everything else was secondary. Marcus appeared again with the laptop. The builder had sent the file. Ethan paused his work on the wire for 30 seconds to look at the file, confirmed what he needed, and handed the laptop back to Marcus with specific instructions about what to load and in what sequence. Marcus looked at the instructions for a moment and then said, "I'll need someone who knows this system." And Ethan said, "I can walk you through it." And Marcus said, "Walk me through it." And Ethan did, talking him through each step without pausing his work on the grounding circuit the way someone talks through a familiar route while driving somewhere else entirely. 8 minutes into the repair, the crowd had long since stopped being a crowd of skeptics. There were still people at the edges who had their arms crossed and their jaws set because some people protect themselves from being wrong by committing to their position past the point where the evidence matters. But the core of the gathering, the mechanics, the riders, the people who had been following this story for 4 days, they had shifted. Not to belief exactly, not yet. To that suspended state between doubt and conviction where people go when something is happening that they haven't decided how to categorize yet. Danny had positioned himself as Ethan's second set of hands without anyone asking or agreeing. It had just happened naturally the way it happens in a good shop when someone's in the middle of something that matters and needs support. He held what needed to be held and handed what needed to be handed and said nothing except what was functionally necessary, which was exactly the right call, and he knew it. The fuel housing was the delicate part. Ethan worked at it with a steadiness that surprised everyone watching because the access angle was difficult and the fracture was fine enough that you had to know exactly where to look to find it, and he had found it by eye alone, without magnification, which shouldn't have been possible for someone his age with his level of formal training. And yet, there his hands were. 14 minutes, 15. Logan was standing with his arms at his sides and his eyes on the bike and his mind somewhere that Marcus couldn't quite reach. Marcus had known Logan for 11 years and could read him the way you read a person after that long, not perfectly, but accurately enough to know when something was shifting under the surface. And something was shifting. Logan was not watching Ethan the way he'd watched the other mechanics. He wasn't evaluating. He wasn't waiting for the failure point. He was watching the way you watch something that already makes sense to you and you're just waiting for it to arrive at its conclusion. Marcus said quietly, "You knew." Logan didn't look at him. Knew what? That it wasn't one failure. Logan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I suspected. I couldn't prove it. I didn't have the language for it." But he did. He did, Logan said. And something in his voice was not quite what Marcus expected. Not pride, not vindication, not the satisfaction of being right. It was something older and quieter. The thing that surfaces in people who have spent years around skill and can recognize it on sight even when it appears in a form they didn't anticipate. 17 minutes in, Ethan straightened up and said, "The firmware is updated." Marcus confirmed it was. And the map file loaded correctly. Marcus read him the confirmation from the screen. Ethan nodded once. He looked at the bike and then at Logan and said, "It's ready to try." The crowd heard that. The crowd went so quiet that the live stream audio, which the producers later described as the cleanest moment in 4 days of recording, picked up the sound of wind moving across the parking lot and nothing else. Logan walked to the bike. He didn't rush. He put his hand on the grip and looked down at the machine for a moment that stretched and held and didn't break until he was ready to let it. Then he swung his leg over and settled into the seat and reached for the ignition. He pressed the start button. The starter motor engaged, the engine turned over, and then nothing. The same result as 4 days of failure. The engine turned and stopped. The dash lit up and showed normal readings, and the engine would not run. The silence that followed had a quality of collapse in it. The air changed. People who had been leaning forward pulled back. The woman 2 rows back took her hand away from her mouth and pressed it flat against her chest instead. Someone on the live stream said something that the moderators removed within seconds. Danny stared at the ground. Marcus stared at the bike. And Ethan stood beside it with his eyes closed, not in defeat, but in the specific posture of someone running through a sequence in their mind, checking each step, looking for what was missed. He opened his eyes. He said one word. "Wait." He crouched back down to the ECU housing. He made a single adjustment, a physical connection that had been seated incorrectly not by him, but by the bike's original assembly. A connector that had been in the wrong position for possibly the entire life of the machine, close enough to function most of the time, and wrong enough to be the final thread that unraveled everything when every other factor was simultaneously misaligned. He stood up. He looked at Logan. "Try it again," he said. And in his voice, there was something that was not certainty exactly, but was indistinguishable from it. Logan pressed the start button. The starter motor engaged. The engine turned over once, twice, and the crowd held its breath in that suspended, agonizing way that happens when people are terrified to hope because hoping has already cost them something once in the last 30 seconds. The engine turned a third time. And then from somewhere deep inside that 640-pound machine that 23 of the best mechanics in the country had declared a mystery, something caught. Something found its footing. The combustion sequence fired in the order it was designed to fire. The fuel pressure held where it needed to hold. The ECU received instructions that made sense for the first time in 4 days and processed them the way it was built to process them, and the Iron Beast came alive. The sound it made was not quiet. It was the sound of a machine returning to what it was, deep and rolling and layered with harmonics that you didn't just hear, but felt the kind of exhaust note that moves through your sternum and settles somewhere behind your ribs and stays there. The idle settled at exactly the right RPM, steady, and even not hunting, not stumbling, just running the way a machine runs when everything inside it is doing exactly what it was designed to do. For 2 full seconds, nobody made a sound, and then the crowd broke. Not in an organized way, not applause building from the front to the back, the way it does at a performance where people know when to clap. It broke the way a crowd breaks when something happens that bypasses the part of the brain that decides how to respond. People yelled. A man near the barricade grabbed the person next to him by both shoulders and shook him. Someone toward the back let out a sound that was somewhere between a laugh and a sob and didn't seem to know which one to commit to. 3 mechanics who had spent combined decades working on machines like this stood completely motionless because the particular silence of a professional confronting something they cannot immediately account for is one of the loudest kinds of silence there is. The live stream chat didn't just move fast, it moved in the way that feeds move when millions of people are trying to say the same thing at the same time and the words pile up faster than anyone can read them. Danny Reeves was standing 3 feet from the bike when the engine caught, and he later told people that the moment he would carry with him wasn't the sound, wasn't the crowd, wasn't any of the technical details that had preceded it. It was the look on Ethan's face. Because Ethan's face in that moment did not show triumph. It did not show relief. It showed something much quieter and much more complicated, the expression of someone who had known this was going to happen and was now experiencing the specific emotion of watching a correct answer prove itself, which is different from pride and different from satisfaction and closer to something like completion. Logan sat on the running machine with both hands on the grips. He was not moving. He was listening. His head was tilted very slightly forward, and his eyes were on something that wasn't in the parking lot they were on, the sound itself, the quality of it, the steadiness, the way it held. He had heard this engine run before. He had been present when it was first started after the original build, and he had known then that it was something he would remember. He was comparing that memory to this moment, checking them against each other, and after 12 seconds of listening, he looked up and found Ethan standing 3 feet away watching him. "You didn't fix it," Logan said. His voice was not loud enough for the crowd to hear over the engine and the noise, just the two of them. "You resurrected it." Ethan looked at him. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The next 20 minutes were the organized chaos of a situation where everyone has a job to do, and they're all trying to do it simultaneously. Logan kept the engine running for 8 minutes straight, letting it reach operating temperature for the first time since the failure, watching the gauges, listening for any change in the note that might signal something unresolved. The bike ran clean. The fuel pressure gauge that Danny had left clipped in place showed steady readings. The ECU was processing normally. The sensor timing, with the firmware updated and the conflicting map replaced, was operating within tolerance on both channels simultaneously. Marcus was on the phone with 3 different people at once, or rather, he was cycling between 3 calls in rapid succession because the nature of Logan's world meant that news like this traveled fast, and the people who needed to know about it needed to hear it from the right source in the right order. Logan watched him pace and said nothing because Marcus had been managing the communication layer of his life for 11 years, and Logan had learned that the most useful thing he could do when Marcus was working was to stay out of the way. The media people were repositioning. The cameras that had been on the crowd were swinging back to the bike, to Logan, to Ethan, who had stepped back from the immediate circle and was standing near the edge of the gathered crowd with his hands in his pockets, watching the bike run with the same quality of attention he'd brought to the diagnosis. Not basking, just watching, making sure. A reporter pushed through to Logan before his road captain could intercept her. "Mr. Steele, who is this kid? Where did he come from? How did he do what 23 professionals couldn't?" Logan looked at her with the particular patience of someone who has been asked questions they consider less important than the situation at hand. "His name is Ethan Cole," he said. "He came from Montana, and he did it because he looked at the right things." "But how did he know?" "You'd have to ask him," Logan said, and he turned back to the bike. The reporter turned toward Ethan. Ethan saw her coming and didn't move, didn't step back, didn't look for an exit. He waited. "How did you know what to look for?" she asked. Everyone else was stumped. Ethan thought about it for a moment, not performing the thinking, actually thinking. Then he said, "They were all looking for the failure. I was looking at how the systems talk to each other. Any one of those 4 problems alone wouldn't have stopped this engine. But together in the right sequence, under the right conditions, they created a loop the ECU couldn't break. You have to see the whole conversation, not just the loudest voice." She stared at him. "You're 18. "Yes." "Where did you learn this?" "My father's garage," he said. "And from fixing every broken thing that came through our door because we couldn't afford to turn work away." She asked him 3 more questions, and he answered all of them in the same way, directly, without elaboration, without the self-conscious awareness of the camera that most people can't suppress when a lens is pointed at their face. When she was done, he nodded once and she walked away, and he went back to watching the bike. Danny appeared beside him. They stood together for a moment without speaking, which was the right way for that particular conversation to begin. Then Danny said, "The connector, the physical one you adjusted at the end, that wasn't in your original diagnosis." "No," Ethan said. "You missed it the first time." "Yes." Danny was quiet. Then he said, "How'd you find it?" "I went back through the sequence in my head when the engine didn't start," Ethan said. "Everything else I'd addressed was correct. So the problem had to be something in the chain I'd assumed was right because it wasn't on my list. That connector is a factory assembly point. It's not something you'd check unless you had reason to. But if the original assembly was slightly off, then every other fix I made would create conditions where that connector became the final bottleneck. He paused. It was always there. I just hadn't eliminated everything else yet. Danny looked at him for a long time. I've been doing this for 30 years, he said. I have never, and I mean never, seen someone find four simultaneous interacting failures by eye and by hand on a machine they'd never worked on in under 20 minutes total. Ethan didn't answer. Where are you working? Danny asked. Gas station in Billings. Danny made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Full time. Yes. How long? 2 years, since my dad got sick. Danny put his hands in his pockets. He was quiet for another moment. Then he said, That's a waste. And he said it in the flat, factual tone of someone stating something they find genuinely upsetting. Ethan looked at him. It pays, he said, and they let me work on whatever comes in. That's not what I meant. I know, Ethan said, but it's where I need to be right now. Logan shut the engine down at the 40-minute mark. He'd kept it running longer than he'd planned to, listening, checking, convincing himself of what his gauges were already telling him. When the engine went quiet, the crowd, which had been maintaining a kind of festive tension for the better part of an hour, let out a sound that was half celebration and half grief at the loss of that exhaust note. He swung off the bike and walked to where Ethan was standing. Behind him, cameras tracked the movement. Around him, people shifted and repositioned. Logan moved through all of it with the steady, unhurried pace of someone who has learned that rushing communicates panic, and he was not panicked, and he did not intend to start. He stopped in front of Ethan. He put out his hand. Ethan shook it. Logan said, The reward stands. $5.4 million. My people will process the transfer today. Ethan looked at him without blinking. All right, he said. Just that. All right, not thank you. Not any of the emotional responses that the crowd was clearly expecting. The disbelief, the tears, the moment where the reality of the number lands and transforms a person in front of an audience. Just all right in the tone of someone acknowledging a fact. Logan studied him. You're not going to tell me you can't believe it. I fixed the bike, Ethan said. You said you'd pay if I fixed it. I believed you. Something crossed Logan's face that was very close to a smile and didn't quite become one. He said, Most people, when you hand them $5 million, have a bigger reaction. Most people need to make it feel like more than what it is, Ethan said. It's money. It's a lot of money. I'm grateful for it, but it's not the part that mattered. Logan looked at him for a long moment. Then what part mattered? Ethan looked back at the bike. The problem, he said simply, the problem was interesting. That answer traveled through the people standing close enough to hear it and kept moving outward through the crowd in whispered repetitions. And by the time it reached the edges, it had already started to become something that people would quote to each other for years. The way certain things get said at certain moments and carry more weight than their words suggest, not because they're complicated, but because they're exactly right. Logan said, Walk with me. They walked to the far side of the venue, away from the cameras, away from the crowd that was beginning to break up into smaller groups of people all having the same conversation at maximum volume. Marcus fell into step at a distance that was close enough to be available and far enough to be absent, which was exactly what the moment required, and Marcus knew it. Logan said, Tell me about your father's garage. Ethan was quiet for a second. Small operation, outside Billings. He built it himself over about 8 years. Did general repair, some restoration. Good reputation locally, people trusted him because he didn't charge for what didn't need to be done. And he got sick. 2 years ago, his hands started going, neurological. He can still use them, but not for precision work, not for anything that requires feel. He said it without drama, the way people describe facts that are painful but settled, that they have had time to place in their understanding of how things are. He couldn't run the shop anymore. We couldn't afford to hire someone qualified. So I started doing it. How old were you? 16. Logan walked for a moment without responding. Then he said, And before that, what was your training? Working beside him since I was 9, Ethan said. He didn't teach me the way a school teaches you. He just put me next to whatever he was working on and explain it while he worked, not dumb down. The real explanation, the way it actually functions, why it's designed the way it's designed. He'd say the most important thing a mechanic can know is why something is built the way it is, because then you already know how it can fail. Logan said, "He sounds like someone I'd like to meet." Ethan looked at him sideways. "He'd like to meet you too. He followed your charity rides. He always said you were doing it right, not making a show of the giving, just doing it and letting it speak." Logan absorbed that. "Does he know you're here?" "He knows I came. He doesn't know about the—" Ethan paused. "He doesn't know about the money yet. My phone's been off." "Turn it on," Logan said. "Call him." Ethan looked at him. "That's not a suggestion," Logan said, and his voice had something in it that was not an order exactly, but was the tone of a man who has buried enough time and enough distance from the people who matter to him to know what advice costs when it comes too late. Ethan reached into his pocket and turned his phone on. They sat on a low concrete barrier at the edge of the lot while Ethan's phone loaded a week's worth of missed notifications. Logan sat beside him and said nothing and didn't look at his own phone, which was a thing that people who knew him well recognized as the specific form of respect he showed when he thought a moment deserved his full attention. The call connected on the second ring. "Dad," Ethan said. "Yeah, I'm okay. Yeah, it's done." A pause. "It's running, full temp, steady, idle, clean, gauges." He listened for a moment, and his jaw moved in a way that it hadn't moved in the entire time he'd been in the public eye that day. Something loosened there, something that the work and the crowd and the cameras had held in place. I know you said it was a long shot." He listened again. "Dad," he stopped. "Dad, they're transferring the money." He stopped again, and this time the silence on his end was the kind that happens when a person is receiving information from someone they love that their body needs a moment to absorb. "Yeah, all of it. 5.4. He said it quietly, not for the people around him, just into the phone. I know. And then even more quietly, "Tell me about the garage. Tell me what you'd fix first." Logan looked out across the parking lot. He was giving Ethan what he could, which was the private fiction that this conversation wasn't being overheard, and he held that fiction carefully while the kid talked to his father about a garage in Montana, about what a new lift would cost, and whether the electrical panel could handle the upgrade, and whether the old Snap-on toolbox in the back corner was worth restoring, or whether it made more sense to start fresh. When Ethan hung up, he sat for a moment with the phone in both hands. Then he said, "He cried." "Of course he did," Logan said. "He doesn't cry. He's not—" Ethan stopped. "He doesn't do that." "He did today," Logan said. Ethan nodded slowly. He was quiet for a moment, and in that moment something moved across his face that was more visible than anything he'd shown all day. Not the problem-solving focus, not the calm of someone doing work, they understand, but something younger, something that fit the 18 years he actually was, the weight of 2 years of carrying something that was too heavy for a teenager's shoulders, and the first real exhale of knowing you've changed the terms. Then Logan said, "I want to ask you something, and I want you to answer it honestly, not the way you think I want to hear." Ethan looked at him. "What are you going to do with it?" Logan asked. "The money, not the plan you'll give to the cameras. What are you actually going to do with it?" Ethan looked down at his phone and then back up. "I'm going back to work tomorrow," he said. "Morning shift, 6 to 2. Logan blinked. "At the gas station." "At the gas station. With $5.4 million in your account." "With $5.4 million in my account," Ethan said. "Because Tommy, the guy who owns it, he's been covering my shifts when I had to deal with my dad's medical stuff. I told him I'd be back Monday. That's tomorrow. You don't not show up when someone covered for you." Logan stared at him. "And after the shift, I start planning the garage," Ethan said. "My dad's garage, proper rebuild, new lift, new electrical, enough space to actually take on apprentices. Kids who can't afford trade school, who learn the same way I did next to someone who'll explain the real thing instead of the textbook version." He paused. "My dad had this saying, he said skills shouldn't belong only to the people who can pay for it. He said it so many times I stopped hearing it for a while. But it's right. It's completely right. And I've got the means now to do something about it." Logan sat with that for a moment. A long moment, the kind he didn't give to many things. Then he said, "You know what I told a reporter an hour ago when she asked me how you did what 23 professionals couldn't?" Ethan shook his head. "I said you looked at the right things." Logan paused. "But that's not quite it. Any skilled mechanic looks at the right things. What you did was look at how everything talked to each other. You saw the system, not the parts." He let that sit. That's not something you can teach in a certification program. That comes from something else. From not being able to afford the parts, Ethan said. When you can't replace something, you have to understand it well enough to fix it with what you have. You learn the relationship between components because you can't just swap them out. He was quiet for a beat. Poverty teaches you to see systems. Rich shops replace things. Poor shops fix them. Logan looked at him for a long moment. Then he said something that he hadn't planned to say that arrived complete and certain from somewhere underneath the conversation they'd been having. I want to be part of the garage, he said. Not financially, you've got that covered now. I mean, I want to be involved. I know people, fabricators, engine builders, restoration specialists who've been doing this for 40 years and would put time into teaching the right kids if someone asked them the right way. He paused. Let me make some calls. Ethan looked at him with an expression that for the first time all day showed something like surprise. Not the stunned, overwhelmed surprise of someone who didn't expect the money, something more specific than that. The surprise of someone who prepared for one outcome and is now standing in a completely different one. Why, Ethan asked. Logan said, because I've been funding things for 20 years that I thought mattered. Charity rides, community programs, scholarship funds. And most of them do matter. But what you describe kids learning by working next to someone who explains the real thing, that's what I would have wanted when I was 17 and couldn't afford the program and couldn't get past the door. His voice was level, but there was something behind it that Ethan heard clearly. I didn't have someone who saw me then. I found my way eventually, but it cost more than it should have. He stood up from the barrier. You're 18. Your father built something worth continuing. Let me help you continue it. The crowd across the lot was thinning now, breaking into smaller groups, people drifting toward their vehicles while others gathered around phones replaying the footage that was already everywhere. The Iron Beast sat under its canopy engine, cooled the bike that had confounded the country for 4 days, sitting quietly in the late afternoon as if nothing unusual had happened at all. Marcus appeared at Logan's peripheral and caught his eye the silent signal of something that needed attention. Logan straightened up. He looked at Ethan. I'll get you my direct number before you leave, he said. Not my assistant, mine. Ethan nodded. And Ethan. Logan paused. He looked at the kid one more time, the gas station shirt, the hands, the face that still hadn't learned to perform for cameras, and might never. Your father raised someone worth meeting. Ethan held his gaze. So did yours, he said, and Logan went still for just a moment because nobody had said anything like that to him in a very long time, and the simplicity of it landed with more weight than a complicated thing would have. Then Logan walked toward Marcus, and Ethan turned back toward the bike, and somewhere on the other side of the lot, a camera caught the two of them moving in separate directions. And that image, the kid and the man walking away from the same center point, would be the one that ran in every story about that day for the next several weeks because it looked exactly like what it was. Two people who had just given each other something they hadn't expected to find. The transfer cleared at 11:47 that night. Ethan knew because Marcus had sent him a text with a confirmation number and a single line beneath it that read, Logan wanted you to know it went through tonight, not tomorrow, tonight. Ethan was sitting on the edge of his motel room bed when the message arrived, still in the gas station shirt, because he hadn't packed anything else, his phone balanced on his knee, and the room's single lamp throwing a cone of yellow light across the wall in front of him. He read the message twice. He set the phone down on the bed beside him. He sat there for a while without moving. Not because he was overwhelmed, but because he was doing the thing he always did. When something large happened, he was letting it become real at the speed it could actually become real. Not faster, not with any performance of feeling that the moment hadn't actually produced yet. $5.4 million. He said the number quietly to himself, not because he needed to hear it, but because saying a thing out loud is sometimes the only way to check whether you believe it. He believed it. He also believed that tomorrow morning he was going to wake up at 5:15, drive the rental car back to the drop-off location, take the bus to the gas station, put on his other shirt, the one with the stain on the left cuff, that he'd never fully gotten out, and start his 6 o'clock shift. Because Tommy had covered for him, and you don't not show up when someone covered for you. That was not a complicated moral position. It was just the way Ethan Cole had been raised to move through the world. He picked his phone back up and called his father again. It was late, but he knew his father would be awake. His father hadn't slept well in 2 years since the hands started going, because the nights were when the fear had the most room to move. His father picked up on the first ring. Still up, Ethan said. Couldn't sleep, his father said. Kept thinking about the connector. Ethan almost laughed. Of everything his father could have been thinking about, the money, the crowd, the cameras, the story that was apparently already running on 3 different news channels, he was thinking about the connector. The physical assembly point that Ethan had missed on the first pass and found on the second. What about it? Ethan asked. I've been trying to remember if I ever showed you that on anything we worked on together, his father said. That specific failure mode, a factory assembly point seated wrong from the beginning, close enough to work under normal conditions, and wrong enough to become the final fault under compound stress. You didn't, Ethan said, not specifically, but you showed me the principle. You always said the first assembly is where the original assumptions live, that whatever assumptions the builder made get locked in at that point. His father was quiet for a moment. You took that further than I meant it. You taught me to take things further than you meant them, Ethan said. That was the whole point. Another silence, and in it, Ethan could hear his father breathing, could hear the particular quality of a person trying to hold something together and not doing it perfectly. I'm proud of you, his father said, and his voice had the roughness in it that appears when a person hasn't let themselves cry in a long time and is now paying the accumulated interest on that restraint. I've been proud of you every day for 2 years, but today is its own thing. I know, Ethan said. Come home soon. Tuesday, Ethan said. I'll be home Tuesday. He said goodnight and set the phone down and turned off the lamp and lay back on the motel bed in the dark. Outside the parking lot was quiet. Somewhere across the city, a machine worth considerably more than it had been worth 4 days ago was sitting in a secured vehicle bay engine, cooled all 4 of its interlocking failures, addressed, waiting for its next ride. And Ethan Cole lay in the dark and thought about the garage in Montana and what the electrical panel would need and whether the floor drain was still functional, and fell asleep before he'd finished thinking through the list. His alarm went off at 5:15. He got up. Tommy Reyes had owned the Billings Road service station for 19 years and had seen approximately everything that a gas station owner sees in 19 years, which is a wider range of human experience than most people appreciate until they've spent time behind that counter. He was 53 broad with a gray mustache that he'd been growing since his 20s and had no intention of removing, and he had the specific quality of steadiness that develops in people who've spent 2 decades being the fixed point in a place where everything else is in motion. He was unlocking the side door at 5:58 Monday morning when he heard the bus pull in across the street. He didn't look up immediately. He finished with the lock, pushed the door open, reached in, and flipped the interior lights. Then he heard footsteps on the gravel and looked up. Ethan was crossing the lot with his hands in his jacket pockets, head slightly down against the early morning cold, moving at the pace of someone who is exactly where they expect to be at exactly the time they expect to be there. Tommy stared at him. You're here, Tommy said. 6 o'clock shift, Ethan said. Ethan. Tommy put both hands on the doorframe and looked at him with an expression that was caught somewhere between disbelief and something more complicated. You have $5 million. 5.4, Ethan said. And I told you it'd be here Monday. I didn't expect. Tommy stopped. He was not a man who lost words often. He tried again. I covered your shifts because you needed covering. That doesn't mean you owe me a Monday morning when you're. He made a gesture with one hand that was intended to encompass the entirety of what had changed in Ethan's life in the past 24 hours. I know it doesn't mean I owe you, Ethan said. I'm here because I said I'd be here. Those are different things. He moved past Tommy through the door and reached for the apron on its hook without breaking stride. Tommy watched him tie it on. Then he said, the news vans have been calling the station since last night. Ethan looked up. 3 of them, Tommy said. Wanted to know if you'd be in today. I told them I didn't know. He paused. I didn't know. Ethan thought about that for a moment. Then he said, what did you tell them, that I couldn't speak for my employees? Good answer. I thought so. Tommy moved behind the counter and started the register sequence. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing. Coming in. Not because you owe me, you don't, but because it's the kind of thing that tells you who a person actually is. Anyone can say what they do with $5 million. You're just showing it. Ethan looked at him. My dad used to say that character is what you do the morning after everything changes. Tommy nodded slowly. Smart man. He is, Ethan said. He really is. The first customer came in at 6:14. He was a regular 60s retired, drove an F-150 that he kept in excellent condition and always paid in cash. He walked to the counter, looked at Ethan, looked at the television mounted on the wall behind the counter that Tommy had turned on at some point in the past 10 minutes, and that was currently showing footage of the Iron Beast coming back to life in a parking lot in California, and then looked back at Ethan. That you, he said. Yes, sir, Ethan said. The man looked at the screen again, looked at Ethan again, put his money on the counter. Regular on pump 3, he said, and good on you, son, good on you. He walked out. Ethan processed the transaction. Tommy, standing 6 feet away, said nothing, but his mustache moved in a way that indicated he was smiling under it. By 8 o'clock, 2 news vans had parked across the street. By 9, there were 4. Logan Steele saw the footage at 7:45 that morning. Marcus had sent it to him, a clip from a local Billings news station that had picked up on where Ethan worked and had sent a camera to see if he'd actually show up. The clip was 42 seconds long. It showed Ethan behind the counter of the road service station in a gas station uniform, processing a customer transaction with the same focused efficiency he'd brought to the Iron Beast the day before. The chyron at the bottom of the screen read, "Teen who fixed $5.4 million motorcycle returns to gas station job day after." Logan watched it twice, then he called Marcus. "Did you see it?" "Saw it an hour ago," Marcus said. "It's running everywhere now. The clip's been shared about 400,000 times since 6 this morning." Logan was quiet for a moment. He said he was going back, he said, mostly to himself. I believed him when he said it. I still didn't think he'd actually... He's also apparently the only employee there this morning because the other guy called in sick, Marcus said. So he's running the whole station by himself with 4 news vans outside. Logan almost laughed. Of course he is. There are people stopping in who don't need gas, Marcus said. Just coming in to see him. He's treating it exactly like a normal shift. What's he doing when people bring it up? Answering their questions, thanking them, and ringing them out. Marcus paused. One woman apparently came in and hugged him, and he just stood there and let her, and then asked if she needed anything else. Logan sat with that image for a long moment. Make a call to the garage builder I used for the Sacramento restoration, he said. Bob Haley. Tell him I've got a project in Montana I want him to consult on. A full rebuild. Tell him there's a young man running it who he's going to want to meet. Already on the list, Marcus said. And the guys from the Tucson shop, the ones who've been doing apprenticeship work with the community college program there. Get me a time to talk to them this week. Done. A pause. Logan? What? The charity ride, Marcus said. The reason all of this started. We've raised more in the past 24 hours than we raised in the 3 days before the breakdown. Logan went still. How much more? About 6 times more, Marcus said. The story broke everything open. People who'd never heard of the ride, who'd never engaged with anything you've done publicly, they're donating. The comments are all some version of the same thing. People saying they watched the kid fix the bike and it made them want to do something that mattered. Logan didn't say anything for a moment. Then he said, reschedule the ride this weekend if we can get the permits, and Ethan rides with us. Not as a guest, as part of the crew. Marcus said he'd make the calls. The thing that nobody had anticipated, that none of the journalists covering the story, none of the motorcycle community commentators, none of the people who had been dissecting the footage and the diagnosis and the reward in the 48 hours since the engine turned over, was the response from the professional mechanics. It started with Danny Reeves. He posted a video on Tuesday evening. Not a polished production. He shot it on his phone, sitting at his workbench in the same shop where he'd been working for 22 years. He spoke for 7 minutes. He talked about the Iron Beast, about what he'd found and hadn't found about the 4 days of failure that had preceded Ethan's 3-minute diagnosis. And then he said something that the internet, particularly the communities that cared about craft and skill and the economics of knowledge, was not fully prepared for. He said, I've been a mechanic for 30 years. I'm good at it. I'm genuinely good at it. But what that kid did in that parking lot, I want to be honest with people about what I saw. He didn't just have knowledge. He had a way of seeing that I don't think certification programs produce. And I've been asking myself why. And I think I know the answer. We teach people to look for the failure that matches the symptom. He was taught, or he taught himself. I'm not entirely sure which to look for the conversation between failures. That's a different skill. And we don't have a good way of creating it deliberately. We create it by accident in people who can't afford to work any other way. He stopped it there. He put down his phone. The video had 2 million views by Wednesday morning. Ethan saw it during his lunch break on Tuesday, sitting in the back of the station while Tommy covered the counter. He watched it twice, the same way he'd read Marcus's text about the money, letting it become real at the speed it could become real. Then he called Danny. Danny picked up on the third ring. I was wondering if you'd see it, he said. 2 million views, Ethan said. As of an hour ago, Danny said. It's moving. You didn't have to do that, Ethan said. I know I didn't have to, Danny said. I did it because it's true and because the conversation it's starting is one that should have started a long time ago. He paused. I also did it because I felt like I owed the problem a better accounting than it got from me. Ethan was quiet for a moment. You didn't fail because you weren't skilled enough, he said. You failed because you were solving the right problem with the wrong frame. That's a different thing. I know that, Danny said. That's what the video was trying to say. It said it, Ethan said. Clearly. A pause, then Danny said, I talked to Logan this morning. Ethan waited. He told me about the garage, the rebuild, the apprenticeship idea. Danny's voice had a particular quality in it, the sound of a decision being tried out before it's fully made. I'd like to be part of it. Not full-time, I've got my shop, but I could come out a few times a year, run workshops, specifically on systems thinking on the kind of diagnostic approach you used. If you'd have me. Ethan took a breath. You drive to Montana to teach kids in my father's garage. I drive to Montana to teach kids in your father's garage, Danny confirmed. And before you say you don't want charity, I wasn't going to say that, Ethan said. I was going to say yes. Danny exhaled. Good, that's good. Danny, Ethan paused. You were the best of the 23. I want you to know I saw that. The way you worked, you were the closest. If the firmware conflict had declared itself differently, you'd have found it. I appreciate that, Danny said, but I still didn't find it. Not this time, Ethan said, but you would have. The call ended, and Ethan sat for a moment in the quiet back room of the station. Through the thin wall, he could hear Tommy dealing with a customer, the familiar rhythm of the transaction, the beep of the register. In 2 days, he would drive home to Billings. In a week, he would sit down with his father, and they would start making lists. Real lists with numbers and timelines and the specific sequencing of decisions that turns an idea into something you can stand inside of. His phone buzzed. A text from a number he didn't recognize with a Montana area code. He opened it. It read, My name is Carol Whitfield. I run the vocational program at Yellowstone County High School. I watched your story. I have 14 students who can't afford trade school and can't get apprenticeships because they don't have credentials yet, and nobody will take them without credentials. Would you be willing to talk? Ethan read it twice, then he typed back, Yes, call me Thursday after 6. He put his phone in his pocket and went back to the counter. Logan made the drive to the rescheduled charity ride staging area on Saturday morning with the Iron Beast running beneath him, the way it was built to run steady and strong, and exactly as it should be, the exhaust note rolling out behind him in the early quiet of a California morning before the city fully woke up. He rode alone for the first 20 minutes, which was the way he thought through things that mattered with road under him in movement, and the particular clarity that comes from being in motion and having nothing else to do but think. He thought about the 23 mechanics. He thought about what Danny had said in the video about frames, about the way expertise can become a limitation when it creates a certainty about what kind of problem you're solving before you've actually identified the problem. He thought about how much of his own life he'd spent solving the wrong problem with the right tools, how many times he'd applied real capability to a situation he'd misread from the beginning. He thought about a 16-year-old kid in a garage in Montana working beside a man who was teaching him the real thing because the real thing was all they had. He thought about what it would have meant to him at 17 to have someone see him. He pulled into the staging area at 7:40. The bikes were already assembling, the riders milling and talking in the specific way of people who are about to do something that matters together. Marcus was at the edge of the lot with a clipboard and his phone and the expression of someone managing 12 things at once and handling all of them. Ethan was there. He was standing beside a borrowed bike, a clean but unglamorous touring machine that one of Logan's chapter members had offered without being asked because word traveled fast in that community, and the community had decided to respond. He was in jeans and a clean jacket, watching the assembled riders with a look that was somewhere between curiosity and something harder to name. Not awe, he was not easily awed, more like recognition, like looking at something he understood the purpose of and was glad to be near. Logan pulled up beside him and cut the engine. "How does she feel?" Ethan asked, looking at the Iron Beast. "Like herself," Logan said. "Like she should." Ethan nodded. "The firmware update will hold. You won't have the interaction issue again with that map." "I know," Logan said. "I trust the work." Ethan looked at him. The morning light was sharp and clear, the way California mornings are in October, and in it, Logan could see the kid clearly, the tiredness that 2 years of hard work had put around his eyes, the steadiness that had grown up inside of it, the particular quality of someone who had been carrying weight for long enough that they'd stopped noticing they were carrying it. "I got a call yesterday," Logan said, "from a foundation in Chicago that funds vocational programs in underserved communities. They saw Danny's video, they saw your story. They want to talk about funding the garage rebuild and a formal apprenticeship program under your father's name." He paused. "I didn't give them your number. I told them to talk to me first. I wanted to ask you before anyone else got access to this." Ethan looked at him steadily. "Why? Because it's your thing," Logan said simply. "Not mine, not a foundation's, not a good story for someone's annual report. Your thing, and I've seen too many good ideas get taken over by the people who fund them. I wanted you to know what you're agreeing to before you agree to it." Ethan was quiet for a moment. What would they want in return? Reporting, documentation, the ability to point to it as a model. Logan held his gaze. "Nothing that would change what it is. But I want you to hear that from them, not just from me. Make them say it to your face and see if you believe them." "Set up the call," Ethan said. "I'll make that determination myself." "I know you will," Logan said. "That's why I'm setting it up." Around them, the staging area was filling with the noise of engines starting, of riders settling in, of the organized energy of a large group preparing to move. The charity ride that had been delayed 4 days by a dead machine was finally happening on a morning that felt to most of the people present like something more than the sum of its parts. Marcus appeared at Logan's shoulder. "We're ready when you are." Logan looked at Ethan. "You ride." "Since I was 15, Ethan said. "Then ride," Logan said. "Up front, beside me." Ethan looked at the borrowed bike. He looked at the assembled riders, the cuts and the colors, and the history they represented, the decades of road and community and chosen family that existed in that gathering. He was 18 years old and had arrived the week before on a city bus with his hands in his pockets, and now he was being asked to ride at the front. He did not make it into a bigger moment than it was. He walked to the bike, checked it the way he checked everything quickly, thoroughly, with complete attention, swung his leg over, and started it. Logan watched him settle into the machine. Something in his chest did something that he hadn't felt in a while, that arrived without warning, and sat there warm and certain, the feeling of something being right. Not fixed, not resolved. Right in the ongoing sense, the way a well-running engine is right, not because nothing will ever go wrong again, but because the fundamental thing is working the way it was meant to work. He started the Iron Beast. The exhaust note rolled out into the morning air, deep and steady and alive, and every head in the staging area turned toward it, the way people turn toward a sound that carries meaning beyond its decibels. And beside it, Ethan Cole's borrowed machine added its quieter voice, and the two of them idled together at the front of a line of riders who were about to do something that mattered on a morning that had started to feel like the beginning of something that didn't have a name yet, but was real and was moving and was not going to stop. The ride lasted 4 hours and 11 minutes. Ethan knew the exact time because he checked his watch when they pulled back into the staging area, not out of impatience, but out of the habit of someone who has spent 2 years accounting for every hour of his day. 4 hours and 11 minutes of road of the Iron Beast running beside him with that deep and steady exhaust note that he had heard in his mind before he ever touched the machine, the sound of something working exactly as it was designed to work. He had not spoken much during the ride. There wasn't much to say, and the road had its own language that he understood without needing to translate it into words. Logan pulled up beside him when they stopped. He cut the engine and sat there for a moment, and Ethan could see on his face the thing that a long ride does to a person. It settles them. Takes whatever was complicated or unresolved and gives it room to breathe until it either sorts itself or reveals itself as something that can wait. "How'd she feel the whole way?" Ethan asked. "Perfect," Logan said. Not good. Perfect. He looked at Ethan. There's a difference. I know, Ethan said. They swung off their bikes together, and Marcus was there immediately with water, in the specific expression of a man who had been managing logistics for 4 hours and had 17 things to report and was deciding which 3 were actually urgent. Logan took the water and told Marcus to give him 10 minutes, and Marcus, who knew when 10 minutes meant 10 minutes, nodded and stepped back. Logan and Ethan walked to the edge of the lot away from the crowd of riders doing post-ride rituals, checking bikes, trading observations, the easy, loose conversation of people who have just done something together. The morning had burned off, and the afternoon was warm and clear, and there was a quality to the light that made everything look like a photograph of itself. I've been thinking about what you said, Logan said. On the ride, something you said before we left. Ethan looked at him. I didn't say much before we left. You said the fundamental thing was working, Logan said, when I asked how the borrowed bike felt. You said it's not pretty, but the fundamental thing is working. And I've been turning that over for 4 hours. Ethan waited. That's how you diagnose the Iron Beast, Logan said. You didn't start with what was broken. You started by mapping what was fundamental, how the systems were supposed to talk to each other, and then found where the conversation was failing. He paused. I've been running my chapter, running the charity work, running everything I'm responsible for the same way for 15 years. And I think I've been starting in the wrong place, looking for what's broken instead of understanding the fundamental thing first. Ethan considered that. What would the fundamental thing be, he asked. For what you do? Logan thought about it honestly, which was a thing Ethan had noticed about him. He didn't answer quickly when the question deserved a slow answer. The people, Logan said finally. The reason the rides matter, the reason the charity work matters, it's because of specific people in specific situations who need something to change. But I've been running the infrastructure of helping without always going back to whether the infrastructure is actually reaching those people. He looked at Ethan. You made me think about the connector, the physical assembly point that was wrong from the beginning and everything worked around it until it couldn't anymore. You think you have a connector problem, Ethan said. I think I might have several, Logan said, and I think I've been running diagnostics that weren't designed to find them. Ethan looked at him steadily. Then find someone who sees differently and show them the system. Logan almost smiled. That's what I did with the bike. And it worked, Ethan said. Man. 3 weeks later, Ethan drove home to Billings on a Tuesday afternoon, the way he told his father he would in a used pickup truck he'd bought for Quish at a dealer in California because it was solid and functional, and the price was right, and because he had never in his life paid more for something than it was worth just because he could afford to. The truck had 112,000 miles on it and ran cleanly, and he'd checked it himself before he signed anything, which had made the salesman visibly uncomfortable and had made Ethan feel completely normal. His father was standing on the front porch when he pulled in. He had heard the truck from a block away. His father had always been able to identify an engine by sound. Even now, even with everything the illness had taken, and he was standing there with one hand on the railing and his face doing the complicated thing that faces do when they are trying to contain more than they are built to hold. Ethan got out of the truck. He walked up to the porch. His father put a hand on his shoulder and gripped it, and they stood there for a moment the way people stand when words are the wrong tool for what they're trying to communicate. Then his father said, "You're skinnier." "I've been busy," Ethan said. "You're sleeping." "Enough. Eating, Dad." "I'm allowed to ask," his father said. "You made me $5.4 million richer. I can ask if you were eating." Ethan looked at him. His father's eyes were bright and his jaw was set in the way it always set when he was holding something back that he'd decided needed holding. And Ethan thought not for the first time that the two of them were built from the same materials in the same configuration, which was both the reason they understood each other so completely and the reason they sometimes drove each other completely insane. "I'm eating," as Ethan said. "Come inside, I want to show you something." He had brought a folder print, pages actual paper, because his father thought better with things he could hold. Plans for the garage rebuild. Not blueprints yet, not official architectural drawings, but detailed enough to be real square footage, equipment list, electrical requirements, ventilation, the lift specifications, the workspace layout that would allow multiple people to work simultaneously without getting in each other's way. And beside those pages, a second set, the apprenticeship structure, the intake process for students, the curriculum, Outline, not a school curriculum, nothing with grades or credentials or the standardized language of formal programs, but a teaching structure built on the same principle his father had always used. You learn by working next to someone who explains the real thing. You learn the why before the how. You learn to see the system before you learn to fix the part. His father sat at this kitchen table and read every page. He read slowly, turning each sheet, carefully going back sometimes to reread something, his eyes moving with the quality of attention that Ethan recognized as the same attention he brought to a difficult diagnosis, not rushing, not performing, comprehension, actually comprehending. When he was done, he set the last page down and put both hands flat on the table and looked at his son. "You kept my name for it," he said. "Cole Mechanical," Ethan said. "That's what it always was. That's what it stays." His father's hands pressed harder against the table. He was very still. "I built that name over 20 years," he said, and his voice had something in it that was barely contained. "One customer at a time. One honest repair at a time. I thought," he stopped. "When I couldn't work anymore, I thought it was over. That the name would just dissolve, that nobody would remember it in 5 years." "It doesn't dissolve," Ethan said. "It grows." His father looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "Sit down, tell me everything, from the beginning. Tell me what the crowd was like. Tell me what Logan Steel looked like when the engine turned over. Tell me all of it." So Ethan sat down at the kitchen table in the house where he had grown up in the town where his father had built something out of nothing over 20 years, and he told him everything. He talked for over an hour. He talked about the crowd and the cameras and the 23 mechanics and the way the 4 failures had hidden behind each other. He talked about the connector, the original assembly point, the thing he'd missed on the first pass and found on the second, and his father leaned forward when he got to that part and asked 4 specific questions and listened to each answer with his full attention. He talked about Danny Reeves and what Danny had said in the video, and what Danny had said on the phone, and what Danny had agreed to do. He talked about Logan, about the conversation at the edge of the staging area, about what Logan had said about the fundamental thing. His father listened to all of it without interrupting, which was the way his father listened when something mattered. When Ethan finished, his father was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The connector. What about it, so?" "That's not something I taught you directly," his father said. "I know I didn't, but you found it by going back through the sequence when the first result was wrong. You eliminated everything you'd already addressed and found the one assumption you'd left unexamined." He paused. "That's not a skill. That's a discipline. Where did you learn that discipline?" Ethan thought about it. "From you," he said. "Not from anything specific you taught me. From watching how you worked when something didn't make sense. You never accepted 'I don't know' as a final answer. You always went back through the sequence. You always found the unexamined assumption." His father looked at him for a long time. Then he said quietly, "I didn't know you were watching that closely." "I was always watching that closely," Ethan said. The call with the Chicago Foundation happened on a Thursday evening, 2 weeks after Ethan got home. He sat at the kitchen table with a legal pad and a pen and his phone on speaker, and he listened to 2 people from the foundation explain their interest, their model, their requirements, their vision for what a program like Cole Mechanical could become at scale. They were professional and articulate and clearly well-intentioned, and Ethan let them talk without interrupting until they were done. Then he asked them 9 questions. Specific questions, the kind that have only one honest answer and reveal a great deal depending on what that answer is. Questions about governance and decision-making authority. Questions about what happened if the foundation's priorities shifted. Questions about the difference between funding a program and owning it. Questions about what model for scale actually meant in practice and who would make decisions about how and where it scaled. The 2 people from the foundation paused between some of the answers in a way that confirmed they weren't accustomed to being asked these questions by an 18-year-old in Montana. But they answered honestly, and the answers were mostly the right answers, and when there was an answer that wasn't quite right, Ethan said so plainly, and they revised it, and by the end of the call, something real had been established between them, not just an agreement, but a relationship in which everyone understood who they were dealing with. After the call, he sat at the table for a while. His father came in from the back of the house and looked at his face and said, "Well, we're taking their funding," Ethan said, "with conditions." "What conditions?" "Cole Mechanical makes all programmatic decisions independently. The foundation provides resources and reporting support. They get to call it a model if it works. They don't get to change what it is in order to make it work somewhere else. His father nodded slowly, and they agreed. After I explained why it mattered, Ethan said, when you understand why something is built the way it is, you already know how it can fail. He looked at his father. Your line. It applies. His father was quiet for a moment. Then he said, it applies to more than engines. I know, Ethan said. That's why I used it. The garage rebuild took 4 months. Not because the money was slow, the money was there, but because Ethan insisted on doing it right, which meant doing it in the right sequence, which meant not rushing the foundation to get to the visible parts. He hired local. Every contractor, every electrician, every supplier was within 50 miles of Billings because the money had come from somewhere else. And he decided that whatever good it could do would start where he lived. His father was present for every significant decision, not as the man signing off on his son's choices, but as the partner. He'd always been the person whose understanding of what they were building went deeper than any specification sheet. Bob Haley, the garage builder Logan had recommended, flew out in the second month. He spent 3 days going through the plans with Ethan, making suggestions, flagging 2 structural decisions that would have created problems down the road, and leaving with a handshake and a standing offer to come back when the first apprentices were ready to start. Danny Reeves came in the 3rd month, spent a weekend helping configure the diagnostic station, and left a set of reference materials he'd compiled specifically for the Cole program. Not textbooks, not certification prep, but case studies. Real problems from real machines written up the way you'd explain them to someone who needed to understand not just what failed, but why the failure was hard to see. Logan called every 2 weeks. The calls were short. Logan was not a man who used words to fill silence, but they were consistent, and in them, Ethan began to understand something about the man that the public version of Logan Steele didn't fully capture. Behind the reputation, behind the chapter, and the charity work, and the motorcycle that had briefly become the most famous broken machine in the country, there was a person who had spent decades trying to figure out how to make the thing he'd built mean something beyond himself, who had been asking in one form or another the same question Ethan had been trying to answer in a different language. How do you take something you were given, skill, knowledge, access, resources, and make sure it doesn't stop with you? In the 4th month, Carol Whitfield brought her 14 students from Yellowstone County High School for a tour of the nearly completed garage. They came on a Saturday morning in 2 school vans, and they stood in the space that had been rebuilt from the bones of something Ethan's father had built by hand over 8 years, and they looked at the new lift and the diagnostic station and the workbenches that were set at a height that assumed the people using them had something serious to do, and some of them were quiet, and some of them were loud. And one kid in the back, maybe 15, with grease already on his jacket, from something that had nothing to do with anything, here kept touching the tools, the way you touch things you've always wanted access to and couldn't believe you're now allowed to be near. Ethan watched him. He recognized the gesture completely. He walked over and said, "You work on anything?" The kid looked up. "My uncle's truck," he said. "When he lets me." "What kind, Murray?" "'89 Silverado, carbureted." Ethan nodded. "Good engine to learn on. What's wrong with it?" The kid's eyes changed the way eyes change when someone asks the right question. "Idle's rough. My uncle thinks it's the carburetor, but I think it's a vacuum leak somewhere in the line. I can hear it, but I can't find exactly where." "How are you trying to find it?" "Listening," the kid said, "and spraying starting fluid around the lines to see if the idle changes." Ethan looked at him for a moment. "That works," he said, "but it's slow and you can miss small leaks. Come here." He walked to the diagnostic station and explained a faster method. Not a lecture, just a direct explanation, the way you explain something to someone who is capable of understanding it, and you're not going to waste their time pretending otherwise. The kid listened with his whole body leaning forward, absorbing each step. When Ethan finished, the kid said, "That's it? That's all you need to do?" "That's all you need to do," Ethan said. The kid looked at the diagnostic station and then back at Ethan. "How do you know all this?" Ethan thought about the answer for a moment. The real answer, not the short one. "My father stood me next to things that were broken and explained why they were built the way they were built," he said, "from the time I was 9 years old. And he never made me feel like the explanation was too complicated for me to follow." He paused. "That's what we're going to do here, if you want to come." The kid looked at him. "Is it free?" "It's free," Ethan said. The kid looked at the space around him, The lift, the tools, the workbenches built for serious work. Then he said, "When do you start?" "I'm 6 weeks," Ethan said. "First Monday in April." "I'll be here," the kid said. And the certainty in his voice was the same certainty Ethan had heard in his own voice standing in a parking lot in California, telling a man with everything that he knew what was wrong with his machine. Not the confidence of someone who has never failed, the certainty of someone who understands the problem and is not afraid of it. Logan came to Billings in March, 2 weeks before the program's opening day. He came alone on the Iron Beast, which he'd ridden from California in 2 days, because he felt like riding, and because some distances deserve to be crossed at road speed rather than airspeed. He pulled into the Cole Mechanical lot on a Tuesday afternoon and cut the engine and sat there for a moment looking at the building. Ethan came out when he heard the exhaust note. He would have recognized it anywhere now. He stood beside the bike while Logan sat still for another moment looking at the garage, the way you look at something that is exactly what you hoped it would be. Then Logan swung off and they shook hands, and Logan looked at the sign above the door, Cole Mechanical in clean letters. Not fancy, just solid and legible and permanent looking, and he said nothing for a moment. Then he said, "Show me." Ethan showed him everything. The lift, the diagnostic station, the electrical panel that could handle any load they'd need for the next 20 years. The workbenches, the reference library. Danny had helped put together the intake files for the first 12 students, the curriculum outline. His father was there, and he and Logan talked for 40 minutes while Ethan worked on a transmission at the back bench. A neighbor's car brought in because the neighbor had heard the shop was open and didn't have anywhere else to take it, and Ethan had said, "Bring it in." And Ethan was working on it the same way he'd always worked on things, with complete attention and the quiet satisfaction of a problem being correctly addressed. At one point, Logan walked to the back and stood beside him and watched him work. He watched for a while without speaking. Then he said, "You know, when I gave you 3 minutes in that parking lot, I didn't actually think you'd fix it." Ethan looked up. "I know." "Then why were you so certain?" Ethan set down the tool he was holding. He thought about it. "Because I'd already seen the problem clearly," he said. "And a problem you can see clearly is a problem you can solve. The only ones that beat you are the ones you're looking at wrong." He paused. "I just had to make sure I was looking at it right." Logan was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I told you that day that I didn't buy a mechanic, that I found a future." "I remember," Ethan said. "I was right," Logan said, "but I was also only half right." He looked around the garage, at the space of the tools, at Ethan's father talking to Marcus near the front door, at the workbenches, waiting for the students who would arrive in 2 weeks. "I found a future, but this," he gestured at all of it, "this is the future finding itself. You didn't need me to build this. You needed the resources, and you needed someone to show up and say they believed the resources were worth it. But the vision, the why of it, the how of it, that was already in you. It was already in your father. It was in the garage that existed before the rebuild." Ethan looked at him. "You showed up," he said. "That mattered." "Showing up is the least of it," Logan said. "Showing up is the beginning of everything," Ethan said. "Without that, nothing else follows." Logan held his gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded once, the specific nod of a man who has been corrected on something and knows it and accepts it. The first day of the Cole Mechanical Apprenticeship program was a Monday in April. 12 students arrived between 7:45 and 8:15. The kid with the jacket from Carol Whitfield's school group was first. He was there at 7:30, standing outside the door, and when Ethan unlocked it and found him there, he said nothing except "Come in," and the kid came in and stood at the nearest workbench and waited. Ethan's father spoke first. He stood at the front of the space and looked at the 12 young people who had come from different circumstances and different backgrounds, but had arrived at the same place for the same reason. They wanted to understand how things worked, and they'd never been given a real door in. He talked for 20 minutes, not from notes, just from the accumulated understanding of a man who had spent his life learning one true thing at a time and now had something to give away. He talked about the principle he'd built his garage on, the one he'd repeated so many times that his son had stopped hearing it for a while and then started hearing it again. Skill shouldn't belong only to those who can pay for it. He said it plainly, the way he said everything, without decoration, without performance, without the self-consciousness of a man making a speech. He said it the way you state a belief you've carried long enough that it has become bone. The 12 students listened. The kid in the jacket had his arms crossed, not defensively, but in the way of someone paying close attention and not wanting to miss anything by moving unnecessarily. Ethan stood to the side and watched his father talk and felt something that he hadn't fully felt since before the hands started going. Since before the fear had taken up residence in the nights, since before 2 years of holding everything together had required him to put certain things in storage until there was room for them again. He felt something settle. Not the relief of a problem solved. He'd felt that in the parking lot in California when the engine caught. This was different. This was the feeling of something beginning that had the right structure to last, a foundation dug to the right depth, a connector seated correctly from the start. His father finished and looked at his son. Ethan nodded. His father said, "Ethan, show them where we start." Ethan walked to the first workbench. He looked at the 12 students looking back at him, at their faces, their youth, the particular mixture of hunger and uncertainty that lives in people who want something they've never been fully allowed to want. He said, "We start with why things are built the way they are, not how they work, why they work that way. Because when you understand why, you already know how they can fail. And when you know how something can fail, nothing it does will ever completely surprise you." He reached under the bench and brought up an engine component, a simple one, something they could hold in both hands and turn over and look at from every angle. He placed it on the bench and said, "Pass it around and tell me what you think it does and why you think it's built the way it is." The kid in the jacket reached for it first, and Cole Mechanical began. Outside, the Iron Beast sat in the lot where Logan had left it, engine cooling. In the April morning, the machine that had once been the most famous broken thing in the country, now just a motorcycle parked outside a garage in Montana, waiting the way machines wait, patient, purposeful, and ready when called upon to do exactly what it was built to do. Some things, when they are fixed correctly, do not break the same way twice. And some things, when they are built on the right foundation, do not need to be rebuilt. They only need to grow. That is what Ethan Cole understood at 18 years old better than most people understand at twice his age, that the most important work is never the dramatic work, the 3-minute fix in front of the cameras in the crowd. The most important work is what happens after, the quiet building, the right foundation, the door left open for the next person who needs it. Logan Steele had once said he didn't buy a mechanic. He found a future. What he hadn't said, what he would say later in interviews, in conversations, in the quiet moments when he let himself be honest about what that week in California had actually meant, was that the future he found had been there all along, working a 6 o'clock shift at a gas station in Billings, carrying something too large for one person, and doing it anyway, waiting for the moment when the right problem would show him to the right room. That moment came. The engine roared, and what followed was not luck, and it was not a story that ended when the money transferred, or the cameras left, or the crowd went home. It was a beginning, and it was built to last.